The Big Bang Notable Book List showcases titles expanding the universe of young minds, one read at a time. Imprints at Holiday House and Simon & Schuster already submitted their titles. Have you? Submit your books for free for a chance to be featured. Learn more at the Storyteller's Shelf podcast.com/submissions.
Hi, storytellers, and welcome back to the Storyteller Shelf podcast. It's Jackie and Teresa here again, and today we are thrilled to welcome an award-nominated author, teacher, and historical fiction mastermind to the show, Paul Rushworth-Brown. Paul is an acclaimed Australian historical fiction and thriller author whose books have captured readers across the globe. And without further ado, Paul, welcome to the podcast. We are so happy to have you here today. And we like to jump right into our first question, which is, could you please tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Jackie, Teresa, thanks so much for having me. Where do I start? Born in England, went to high school in Canada, played professional football, or what you guys call soccer over in Canada, came to Australia in the early 80s, played football over here, then became professional football coach, and then I coached and I was a coach educator for over 10 years, coached one of the national teams over here. And then once I retired from coaching, I started writing. I'm also a high school teacher. I started writing probably about, let's say 5 years ago now. Most of my writing was based on historical fiction. My latest novel is Outback Odyssey, and I've written 3 other novels, Skullduggery, Red Winter Journey, and Dream of Courage. And now I'm thinking about my 5th novel.
That's incredible. 5th novel. That's such a huge milestone. And we will talk about Outback Odyssey a little bit later. But before we get into that, you have lived so many places, more places than most people get to. Did that shape your writing voice at all?
I think to be an author, you've got to have experience, and plus because I'm old. So I suppose the more experience that you have, I think the easier it is to bring some of those experiences into your writing. So it does. Obviously, living in Canada and in England, most of my books are usually based in one of 3 of those countries. So it does definitely helps your writing.
Okay, we call it wise here, not old. It's wisdom, the wisdom that comes with being on this earth.
In Australia, we still call it old. A lot of old people don't have any wisdom.
That is very true. And you know what? Once in a while, a young one comes in a little more wise than the rest of us do.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about you as a teacher. Give us a little info on how you got into teaching, why you chose teaching, and if teaching has influenced how you storytell.
I'll answer the last part of it first. And I mean, I think being a teacher at certain times, and you need to be able to entertain, right? And if you can entertain, then you can get students to listen to you. And once you've got them like that, then you can sort of like teach the outcomes that you're supposed to. With regard to teaching, interestingly, I fell into it because in a certain way, because I actually went to university originally to get a sports science degree to help with my coaching. And at that time, I was working for Football Federation Australia and Football New South Wales, and so I went to university to get that Bachelor of Human Movement, or that degree. I noticed that the core electives were exactly the same as teaching. The only difference was that you had to do the extra year to do a graduate diploma of education. I actually transferred over to the teaching side of things, mainly because you know what it's like as a coach. You know, it's quite shaky sometimes. Sometimes you're in. If you start losing, you're out. So I thought, teaching would be something good to fall back on. So I did the extra year, the graduate diploma of education, and I did really, really well in university and topped the year out of about 160 students. And won a $500 prize. Anyway, to make a long story short, I got targeted straight out of university. So over here, if a school likes you, they target you and they say, all right, we want you to come straight to our school, straight from university, and start teaching. And that's what happened. So that was about 23 years ago.
I'm laughing because you've done so many things and you've lived a lot of places, you've worked with kids in different ways and adults in different ways. And I always find people like you, they have one of the most enriching ways of writing because you're used to communication. Just like you said, getting kids excited to learn, it's the same thing. If you write fiction, you also have to get whoever's reading excited to read your book. If not, it's not happening. Just like teaching, they're not learning.
And I always try to, in my novels, I always try to entertain, but I also like to for the people that to learn something from them as well. Sometimes that's it's a subliminal thing.
I feel like there's so much that can be said about not only your experience as a teacher and places that you've lived and, just your experience. Obviously, could you give us a short overview of Outback Odyssey?
Um, it it's a dual layered book, and that won't make any sense to you whatsoever at the moment. But at face value, if you read it, it'd be a historical fiction, um, romance adventure set in 1950s Australia, and basically about a young English migrant that comes over to Australia in the 1950s as what we call a 10-pound pom. And they send him out to the outback. It's a story of because he spent 12 years in an orphanage because his parents died when he was about 12. He feels like he doesn't belong anywhere, and so that even makes it worse when he gets sent to the outback and stuck in the middle of nowhere, thousands of kilometers from the next station, what we call them over here, which is like a huge farm. But some of those stations can actually be the size of England. And then his story starts from there. It's tied up with adventure and a treasure hunt. But underlying all of that you probably wouldn't see unless you were looking for it, is basically a story of belonging, silence. He's befriended by a group of Aboriginal or First Nations people. And there's an elder called Jarrah that actually takes him under his wing and teaches him the way of the bush or the outback. And so he learns how to survive in the outback, where to look for water, all that type of thing. And it underneath, it's allegorical, and it's the symbolism is based on appreciating First Nations culture or Aboriginal culture, and it gives you a very, very good insight into how Australian First Nations people live, how they survive in the bush. I'll give you an example. At one point in the book, Jimmy, who's the protagonist, goes with Jarrah to a secret place, and Jarrah, obviously, he's dressed in his possum loincloth and all that type of thing. He's got a spear, and Jimmy, he's got a cask, and he runs out of water. So he says to Jarrah, "What are we going to do? We don't have any water, and you haven't drunk any. Why?" So Jarrah says, "Okay, I'll show you." Anyway, he picks up a branch from a tree, and he goes around sort of like tapping on the red dirt, and then he stops and he starts digging, bends down and he starts digging with his hands, and he reaches in, and Jimmy doesn't know what he's grabbed. He's grabbed something. Anyway, he goes like that and he squeezes it, and this water sort of like trickles into his mouth. Then he turns to Jimmy and he opens his mouth, and it's a frog. It's a water holding frog, right? He takes the drink, and then he puts it back in the hole in the dirt and covers it up with sand, and they continue on. So things like that, how to sort of like find water and live in the bush, that's part of it. But it's yeah, it's a very interesting, I suppose, celebration of First Nations culture in that part of the novel.
What inspired you to weave the First Nations themes into Outback Odyssey?
Okay, so in 2023 we had a referendum, and the referendum was set up to basically have a vote to allow First Nations people to have a say in Parliament. Anyway, it was knocked back, and I thought to myself, I mean, this doesn't come out in the novel or anything, but I thought it was so poor that, here's a peoples that have been living in the country for 60,000 years. And to have a say in Parliament, they're not going to be able to change laws or anything. It has to go through the Senate and all that type of thing. And I thought it was a bit poor that it was knocked back by um, Australia. So there's a little bit of allegorical aspects in there that basically it doesn't preach, but what it does is it shows that here's some people that have been living in Australia for 60,000 years, and we've got things that we can learn from them still. So this is where that sort of like underlying allegorical, I suppose, teaching comes in, even though you never know it. As I said before, it's just an adventure, romantic treasure hunt, right? But those allegorical parts, they show that Jared has wisdom, and there's a lot that we can actually learn from First Nations people, and there's no reason to be scared of them or their culture or the way they live.
I really, I feel the same. I think we can learn from each other, and especially when you're mentioning a deep appreciation for First Nations, especially culturally. What if we could go into more for the story? Was there a particular moment or event that sparked the idea for Outback Odyssey?
It basically started, even though sort of like underlying, I've already mentioned, just I suppose the actual concept. And people say, "Oh, call me an advocate," and I've never really considered myself an advocate. I'm just an author that likes writing novels. And as I said, it's I don't preach. I just tell a story. So the original concept came from a time when I was actually a national coach, and I was coaching one of the national Paralympic teams, and the government and the Australian Sports Commission came up with this plan called the Winning Edge program, and they were only going to fund teams in the country or athletes in the country that were 10th above or 10th in the world or above. And at that time, we were 10th in the world, and just missed out on the London Olympics and that type of thing. Anyway, so they actually decided to not fund the Pararoos, the national Paralympic team. And I thought, well, that's not really fair because we're 10th in the world. We're more successful. I mean, at that point, the Socceroos, the national able-bodied team, I think they were second in the world, and yet they were still going to be funded. So I actually went to public. So I went to the ABC, BBC, and it became a huge. I started a petition. It had something like 80,000 people who signed it and that type of thing. Anyway, to make a long story short, they didn't stop the funding. I lost my job because I went public with it, and it went in the newspapers. It was on Channel 10 and all that type of thing, and I was quietly sacked. And then a few years later, and I named them the Pararoos, and I'd spent 10 years of my life sort of like building up this squad, finding players and all that type of thing, and so like and when we were playing a tournament in Darwin, and a reporter came up to me and he said, "Look, just like the Socceroos and the other national teams, do you have a name for them?" And I thought quickly, and I said, "Oh, just 1 minute." I said, "Pararoos," right? Anyway, I went and spoke to my captain and vice captain, see if they agreed with it, and they did, right? So anyway, what happened was a few years later, they came up with they filmed a documentary about like getting the sack or the funding stopping. My name was never even mentioned in this documentary, even though I'd sort of like named them, and I'd spent 10 years of my life sort of like building the squad and that type of thing. Anyway, I just that idea of silence sort of like grew, and I thought, well, that's very, very similar to what's happening with First Nations people in Australia. They weren't giving the referendum was called The Voice, and I knew how they felt because they weren't given a voice because the referendum was knocked back, and I knew how they felt because I watched that documentary, and not even going to mention And I just felt sort of like that silence. And that was basically I suppose the seed that started the novel. Even though obviously the novel has nothing to do with football or anything, but just that idea of silence and reckoning and having a voice. And I suppose allegorically, Australians quite often stop First Nations people from having a voice.
I am so sorry that that happened, that you went through that. But I think, what is it they say that life imitates art or art imitates life, and that the appreciation that you're showing in the book and that you mentioned silence and that you're advocating and the allegory right there. I think that there's a lot to be said, and I think a lot of people are gonna really appreciate this book and that this will help to bring light into something that's important, both for you and something that happened past experience, but also for First Nations. I think that's great that you're sharing that story, and we appreciate that.
Yeah, I want to get the point across that an important point across is that in the novel it's subliminal, so you don't sort of like hear about any of that sort of stuff. If you if you look for it, you'll see different types of symbolism that occurs.
That's really powerful. And it's good that you brought up subliminal messaging because we are going to talk right now about the writing process, and that segues into it so beautifully. So let me ask the question that we always get surprised by the answer. It changes for everyone. Tell us a little bit more about your creative process.
So for me, when I write, I don't plan anything. For me, it's like a movie and come going across my eyes, and all I'm doing is converting that movie and putting it down on a bit of paper, right? And I like twists and turns, right? I like shocks and surprises, and all my novels are sort of like known for these twists and turns. I can do that because I haven't planned anything. So if I start writing and I get to like halfway through the book, or even sometimes towards the end, I might say, "Oh, that'd be a great twist there." So then it's very, very easy for me to go back to sort of like the beginning of the book or the middle of the book and plant the seed. So that I take people or the readers on to like in this direction, and then when they get to this part of the novel, they go, "What? I didn't see that coming."
I love that. I've done that too. Run with the good ideas that come before your eyes. All right, let me ask next. What does writing look like for you? Do you write at a specific time? Do you have days where you only do writing and you don't do any other work? Or do you write in between in the little hours of the day?
Usually for me, it's sort of like on the weekends, first thing in the morning on a Saturday morning, first thing in the morning on a Sunday morning, even before I've had breakfast. And I find that my mind just starts ticking over and that movie starts playing. And that's when I start writing. Easy as that. Sometimes, not very often. I mean, every author has like a author's writer's block every once in a while. If I have writer's block, I'll sort of like leave it. I'll be walking down the street, and then quite often that writer's block turns into a twist or a turn, and that's when I go back and say, "Oh, that's a good idea."
You've just turned writer's block from something you dread into this stop sign that says, wait, an idea is coming.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about historical fiction writing because when you're writing with a historical perspective, you have to know what's happening during that time period. So there might be a lot of research involved. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you did research to make sure that everything you needed to be accurate was accurate in your book?
Obviously, being a teacher, that's you become very good at research, and I like my historical fiction novels. People who are reading it to feel as if they're actually there in that time period. Sometimes my novels are descriptive so that when people are reading it, they actually feel that they're sort of like in 1950s Australia, or they're standing in the middle of the bush with the eucalyptus and the fauna and the flora and that type of thing. To do that, you need to do a lot of research, not databases, basically. I don't use Google. I'll go into a historical database like to store or something like that, and go right to sort of like secondary um, secondary descriptions and papers, written by scientists, because I find firstly I find it really, really interesting to find out how people lived in a particular different time, but also um, what it was like, and yeah, so it's really important to me that you know that realism, and it's not realism that's um, taken from Google or something like that. I go right to the source.
So, Paul, a lot of our listeners are newer to writing. They're emerging authors, and a lot of them are working on historical fiction or they want to get into it. But there's a common trap that we've seen spoken a lot about, which is some people, when they find all of the facts, they did their research, and they just want to get the reader oriented really quickly to the time period. So they do a fact dump of everything that is happening. This is what it looks like. This is what it smells like. This is what's happening in history right now. How can we avoid doing a fact dump when we're writing and instead have a nice balance between historical accuracy showing while creating your narrative as a writer?
Well, for me, story is the most important thing. So you start writing the story, and then to build your character arcs and to, I suppose, build this world that your characters are living in. You don't have to do it all at once, but the story is more important than the descriptive parts and that. So if you build your story and build your character arcs, that research that you've done for the particular time period can be put in 300 pages rather than just dumping it all in there. And I mean, things like people's emotions and their memories and their thoughts. They're, that it's very easy to build sort of like characters by using thoughts and memories and even sort of like internal dialogue. So for me, the story always comes first.
I really appreciate all of like this conversation is awesome, especially for me as I'm still emerging author. So this is really fantastic advice. We appreciate that. But talking about literacy, let's switch gears now. So in the United States, for example, we have something called COVID slide where the kids are struggling in sort of literacy. And I don't know what the state of literacy is in other parts of the world, but what's your take on the current state of literacy in Australia?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a teacher, it's becoming more difficult to get them away from gaming, get them away from computer screens. So the Australian government just brought out the Department of Education brought out a new policy where kids actually have to put their phones in a pouch before they go into the gate into school. But even then, in class, it isn't a problem. But you go outside to lunchtime in the high school where I work, and the amount of kids just sitting on a bench somewhere in front of their computer screen or their laptop, just playing games. I mean, it's a worry. It really is. And you can tell sometimes they're up to all hours of the night playing games and on social media and all that type of thing. So yeah, I think it's a real issue, and I can't see now that it's going to get any better.
Yeah.
Things like books like Harry Potter and that type of thing. They were huge over here. Kids love the books, and they love the movies more though. I think because they didn't have to think; they could just watch.
I think this sounds like a worldwide kind of conundrum that we're all facing because in the States we have that where I can give you an anecdote. Jackie, I didn't share this with you. Not me personally, but in my area, my friends of mine have mentioned there's a policy in the school district not too far from me, and they have a kind of similar thing that you were mentioning where the kids no longer can have their phones at school where I'm at. So, I mean, it sounds like it's not just a US problem. It sounds like it's a worldwide thing that's going on. And the question is, what can we do as the authors to help for that? That's one of the things to kind of really push the literacy?
I wish I had the answer to that. Um, I mean, even in Australian high schools, we used to have this something called DEAR, and you should start the day off, and it stood for drop everything and read. And so every student had to have a book and start the day by reading. Reading. Sometimes they just like get a magazine and open it in front of them and just look at it. So if I knew the answer to that question that you just asked, I don't know the answer.
It's a hard question. And we have Deer Day too here, but I noticed that it's not really celebrated very much in schools. It's something that's very pushed by publishers and people who work with books, but that tends to trickle down to adults, not really to children, which is not quite helpful.
I think in a lot of cases it comes down to parents and before they even go to school. Because my kids, when they were sort of like in the early stages of primary school, they had a reading ability of about 11 years old, and that's mainly because growing up they used to sit on Dad's lap and read quite often, and Dad taught his kids how to read and enjoy reading. So yeah, I think that's the main issues that those the parents at an early age make it part of their lives.
I think you're right. I think who surrounds you when you're a kid really makes a difference in everything you do. Learning any skill, reading is just another one of them. And you tend to take more pleasure in doing it when you have community to do it with. If not, can be a lonely endeavor.
Yeah, and also that sort of like flows down from the parents. Teach Excuse me. Did their parents teach them how to read at an early age? So usually those things trickle down.
Now, this is the one that we've been waiting for, Paul. The question that we've been dying to ask you, which is we know you shared with us that Outback Odyssey is being considered for a movie adaptation. So it could be coming to the big screens rather soon. Could you tell us a little bit more about the behind the scenes of what that process is?
Sure. So I have a publicist and a Swedish director by the name of Carl Svensson actually contacted her. I've actually had two meetings with him so far, and he's directed two movies. He's on IMDb, and he contacted me, and we've spoken about the pitch deck. After I wrote the Outback Odyssey, the novel, um, I actually wrote the screenplay as well, and so he was sent the screenplay and the pitch deck. Um, so pitch deck is sort of like, basically just sort of like pictures, names the characters, describes sort of like who the characters are, and that type of thing. So all that was sent to him, and then we had two meetings, and then on the meeting with him, when was it? The day before yesterday, a colleague of his who's involved with film, actually lived and worked in Australia for a few years. He's Dutch, so he's actually contacted him. I received an email from my publicist last night, and she said that Carl Svensson had emailed her asking if he could send the pitch deck and the screenplay to his colleague in Australia. So the email was received day before yesterday, but she sent it to me last night, and of course I said, "Yeah, go ahead." But yeah, it is. So for me, just writing the novel was and having it published was exciting. But if they make it into a screen adaptation, I mean, maybe the kids will watch it rather than read it.
Paul, can you tell us about how you went from the novel itself to writing the screenplay for it?
Oh, it was very, very difficult for me. I found it very difficult, and one of the reasons why is because, as I mentioned, I like to be descriptive and actually put characters in the setting. Whereas in a screenplay, that's the director's job. So actually writing the story with obviously less words and less colorful writing and just basically the raw story, and just having sort of like a paragraph at the beginning of a particular act, which explains where they are, and what the setting is. I found that very difficult because the director will take the script, and he's the one that, even though he's got sort of like a generalized view of sort of like what the set is or what the setting is, he's the one that has to direct the camera to all the sort of like visual descriptions, rather than, as an author, you not explaining it, but painting that picture. So yeah, I found it very difficult to do.
All right. So we are moving into a little bit more about, general writing and advice for our new writers. Paul, what advice would you give an aspiring historical fiction writer?
Start. Just start, right? And don't be too hard on yourself. Write 1 page, write 5 pages. It doesn't matter. Just start. And don't feel as if you have to. When I first started with my first novel, I think back, and so like one of the biggest problems that I had as an author was the fact that I had no patience, absolutely no patience whatsoever. All I wanted was just to get this story or this movie that's taking place in front of my eyes down on paper, get it published, and get it out there on shelves, right? It's taken me, best part of sort of like 7 years to just calm down, develop the character arcs, use like different tools in the way that you present the story and tell the story. Outback Odyssey took me 2 years. And some people, they might write 1 page, they might write 2 pages, and they say, "Oh, this is too hard. I can't do it," and they give up. But keep those 2 pages, and then you might be walking along the street sometime and think, "Oh, that would be a good sort of like part to the story if I add that." And then they go back, right, and start putting that bit to the story, and that's how the story progresses. So the most important thing is to be patient and just start. Just write. Just write. It could be anything. I mean, my first novel started out as the first few pages when I originally starting out as a time travel novel. Skullduggery originally was going to be a time travel novel about a person that's like traveled back to 1590 England, to the moors of Yorkshire, to see how his great grandfather times 10 was living, and then it ended up being a whodunit. Set in the 16th century.
Those are both golden pieces of advice. I think you probably captured everything that weighs on an author, especially in the beginning. One is it's hard to start, or you start and you doubt yourself, and then you start feeling imposter syndrome rather than starting the book, and that distracts you. And then the other thing you mentioned was just recognizing that writing and publishing, it really is a marathon, not a sprint. This takes a long time for everyone. And if you feel like it's taking a long time for you, you're not alone. That's just the process.
Yeah, and there's a lot of knockers. I remember when I was in the process of writing Skullduggery, an acquaintance of mine, I said to him, I said, "Look, it's with the publisher. I'll give you a signed copy." And he said, so I'm just trying to think of his exact words. He said, "Look, your book is going to be they're going to be using it to wrap up fish and chips in in the near future." And here here I am, 4 books later. So
That's like a major vindication moment when you know, like, your work is good, and then you get to get, like, calls from, like, producers and filmmakers and things like that, and like,
yeah.
"Is it wrapping fish now?" Alright. What was your favorite book you read as a teen?
I used to read a lot of Enid Blyton when I was younger, a child.
Oh, okay. What is the hardest part about writing historical fiction?
Ensuring authenticity. It's just like being a teacher, if you try to lie, kids kids pick up on it. If you try to say something or teach something that you don't know, or you haven't, might not be true, they know that there's something not right. And I think it's the same with an author. That's why you've got to be very, very careful, especially when you're dealing with cultural aspects of things. And also, even in Australia, on a couple of interviews that I've done, some people say, what's a white fella born in England, living in Australia, or an Australian, writing about First Nations history and First Nations culture? I say, I don't speak for Aboriginal people. What I do is I tell a story that echoes things about their culture.
I like that. I think that is probably the best answer. If someone ever were to ask that kind of question, it's you can't speak for somebody, but you're only basing it on your own perspective. So you can only go based on what you know.
It was amazing to have you on here. You're so inspirational. We love talking about your book and your creative writing process and hearing all of your advice. And this is the moment that we tell all of our listeners, please go to our website, thestorytellershelfpodcast.com, find the episodic calendar page and click on Paul's name so that you can see where you can go buy his book and support him on his website. Until next time, storytellers. If you enjoyed this episode, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, and share this with a friend because we know that other people out there could use this too. And one last thing, if you like freebies, definitely join us in our email newsletter. Pop your email in, it's for free. We don't spam you, but we occasionally send things like career opportunities, awards and contests, and handy dandy things like pitch guides and query guides that you might find very useful. So otherwise, we will let you go today, and we'll see you again next time.
This episode of the Storyteller's Shelf podcast is brought to you by Harney and Sons Fine Teas, a perfect companion to every story. Whether you're reading, writing, or just enjoying a quiet moment to yourself, Harney and Sons offers a beautiful selection of teas to elevate this experience. From classic blends to unique finds, every cup is crafted with care, just like the stories we love to share. Shop harney.com/discount/storyteller, and storyteller is in all caps. Now let's get back to the show.